Welcome to Section 1 of Mastering Magento. In this first video, we'll be preparing your server, so let's get started. Before we begin, make sure you have a Linux server with root access. I'll be using a virtual machine with Ubuntu 12.04 installed. Make sure we have internet access on that machine so that you can download and install software from the Ubuntu repositories. And we're also going to be editing a lot of files through the terminal, so make sure your command line skills are up to par. Lastly, get your hands on the code samples for Section 1, since in there you can find the example web server configuration we'll be using in this video. The software that we'll be installing in this video differs slightly from a typical LAMP stack. I'll be showing you how to run Magento on an Nginx web server with MySQL and PHP FPM as the backend. The reason for doing this is because a lot of Magento optimization techniques involve supplanting Apache with Nginx. So seeing this in a video tutorial will be helpful to any of you who are experimenting with Magento optimization. First step is to fire up our terminal and install the Nginx web server. Our command is sudo apt-get install nginx. Say yes when prompted to install dependencies. Next, we're going to install MySQL. Our command is sudo apt-get install mysql-server. And while we're at it, we're going to go ahead and install MySQL Workbench. MySQL Workbench is a GUI tool that we can use to configure our MySQL server. Again, say yes when prompted to install any dependencies. During the MySQL installation process, we're going to be prompted for a root password. You can make this whatever you would like. Eventually, we'll be creating a separate user for just the Magento database. Once MySQL is finished installing, we're going to install PHP. So type sudo apt-get install php 5-fpm. PHP FPM is the fast CGI process manager. We're also going to need to install a variety of modules required by Magento. Again, say yes when prompted to install dependencies. With our software installed, we can clear our terminal and prepare to configure our web server. We're going to be creating a new virtual host, so let's create the file etc nginx sites available Magento. I've created this file from the sample code for Section 1. You can see that we're setting up a basic virtual host with a new document root and a new server name. The Magento specific items are pretty much just this location block, which is saying try an existing file or folder and then pass things off to a handler, and the handler rewrites everything to index.php. Nginx is going to use PHP FPM to process any PHP scripts, so we're using the out-of-the-box fastCGI handler, which is listening on port 9000 by default. So we haven't had to mess with our PHP FPM configuration, which should be fine for the remaining videos in this series. So with our virtual host configuration saved, we now need to enable it. We do so by symlinking the etc nginx sites available Magento file into the etc nginx sites enabled folder. So what we'll see in that sites enabled folder is now two virtual hosts. The default virtual host for Nginx, which we can ignore, and our new Magento virtual host. So let's restart our Nginx service. And before we test this in the browser, we want to add to our etc hosts file the virtual host name and map it to our localhost IP address. So make sure you do that and save it. And we also want to create just a sample index file to test this in the browser. So make sure first you make the var www Magento folders, and then we can edit the index.php file in there. And I'm simply outputting the PHP info page. Okay, we can clear our terminal, and let's test this in the browser. We're going to go ahead and load magento.local, and it looks good. So let's recap. We started out by installing our server software. Once we had Nginx, MySQL, and PHP set up, we configured our Nginx virtual host in the Sites Available folder and symlinked it to the Sites Enabled folder. Don't forget to make sure that your etc hosts file is updated, and also don't forget to create a sample index.php file that you can use to test your server in the browser. Coming up next, we're going to proceed with installing the Magento software, so stay tuned.